There has been some backlash against the sexual revolution lately, like the Bumble campaign. Let's start with that.
These ads are so desperate. They're giving major pick-me energy and major where's my hug energy.
Girls can't have sex with anybody, or they're dirty, or we're sluts, or whatever. And now it's like, wait a minute, where are you? We can't sell our dating site.
Okay, so quick timeline. The company Bumble has been struggling a bit lately, so they are experimenting a bunch of different things. In late April, they launched a rebrand saying that dating needed a wake-up call and featuring historic images of women exhausted from the dating scene. Then they released new billboards suggesting that celibacy is not the answer to dating fatigue. Messages like "thou shalt not give up on dating and become a nun" and quote, "you know full well a vow of celibacy is not the answer" were written on those billboards, and people did not like it. I mean, Bumble was supposed to be the app where women make the first step. It was the feminist app, right? So why pressure women into doing something they might not want to do? Do I have to make the argument that Bumble's feminism is performative? So as a really great analyst once wrote, the dating app Bumble was founded in 2014 by Tinder co-founder Whitney Wolfe Herd. Herd claims that everything they do at Bumble, quote, is driven by female empowerment. On the app, women send the first message, they have control. Men cannot access them without their confident approval. But all this so-called female empowerment is limited to the initial texts. Bumble only disrupts one aspect of what philosopher Amya Srinivasan described as, quote, the informal regulatory system of gendered sexual expectations. Basically, it means things like, women who sexually excite men are supposed to finish the job, that's one rule, or going home from the bar alone without a girl makes you a loser. Actually, Bumble recently changed its structure. Now men can reach out to women through prompts, so the female empowerment bit is not really relevant anymore. Bumble is desperately trying to find the best solution to the biggest threat on their industry, dating fatigue. People are tired of dating apps, women leave dating apps, and dating apps are panicking. The recent anti-celibacy ad campaign we mentioned is yet another attempt at combating the effects of dating fatigue. It's more provocative and teasy than they usually do, but the goal remains the same. Keep people on the app, and especially women. Why women? Why are they obsessed with women? In a little Insta story series on the topic, the wonderful Lily from @vulgardrawings answered my question by using the concept of the nightclub model, a marketing model. So basically, nightclubs and bars try their best to look attractive to women, because wherever women go, men will follow. That's what dating apps wants to reproduce. That's why the conservative app, The Right Stuff, didn't work. Female users didn't want to go on an app with a bunch of conservative men. Let me tell you, this is natural selection at its finest. So Bumble, the feminist platform, is using one of the oldest sexist marketing tricks to grow their company, or at least to survive as a company. For me, Bumble is a good example of how sexual revolution plus capitalism equals not exactly what we were hoping for. The sexual revolution of the 1960s and 70s was a time where people began to rethink and challenge traditional views on sex and relationships. With the advent of birth control, individuals were more free to explore their sexuality without the fear of an intended pregnancy. The feminist movement and shifting social norms encouraged people to question old ideas about gender roles and sexual behavior. This period marked a significant shift towards more open and liberal attitudes towards sex, transforming societal views and personal freedoms. It's been quite some time since the beginning of the sexual revolution, so I think it would be a good idea to do a little assessment. First of all, it's important to keep in mind that the ideas and demands of the sexual revolution were integrated within our society through legislation, but also through culture. As an example, rap music videos, Peach, OnlyFans, dating apps are all presented as cultural products of the sexual revolution. However, those products also reflect all the characteristics of the society we live in. Our liberal societies are capitalist and patriarchal. It means that all the cultural products are mentioned, so rap music, Peach, OnlyFans, etc., reflect how a capitalist and patriarchal society understands sexual liberation. That's why it's still acceptable to hear things like Bumble bragging that their app is a feminist app, or that, some men call themselves polyamorous because they date 4 women at the same time and none of them is aware of this. So when we criticize the modern products of the sexual revolution, it's important to keep in mind that capitalism and patriarchy also shaped them. We naively thought we could invent a capitalism and patriarchy-friendly version of the sexual revolution that was truly gonna liberate women. That was a bold move, and we are paying the price today.
Well, I just think nothing good comes from having sex, including children. No, I'm just kidding. I think with the overturning of Roe v. Wade and, our rights being stripped away from us, this is a way that I can take back the control. And it just sucks that it has to be in that way, but I just don't feel comfortable until things change.
So in the video, she cites, quote, "Nothing good comes from having sex, including children, and the overturn of Roe v. Wade, our rights being taken away from us, as reasons not to engage in sex with men." She says that that's how she takes back control over her body, so there's almost an activist dimension to that decision. She boycotts sex the same way you should boycott Israel. Sorry about this. But yeah, what Julia says is coherent with the actions and demand of the 4B movement. The 4B movement in South Korea is a feminist movement where women are saying no thanks to dating, marriage, having kids, and heterosexual relationships. It's a way for them to push back against the pressure and unfairness that come with traditional gender roles. By opting out of these expectations, they're taking back their independence and standing up to patriarchal norms. Actually, in 2019, a survey found that 24% of women in their 20s reported cutting back their spending on beauty products in the previous year, with many saying they no longer felt they needed to put in the effort. 3 years later, in 2022, the same year Roe v. Wade was overturned in the US, Yoon Suk-yeol was elected as president of South Korea. Yoon Suk-yeol punctuated his campaign with anti-feminist comments and positions, especially regarding abortion. In 2023, he even decided to get rid of the Ministry of Gender Inequality. Now maybe you remember this graph, which went viral a couple of months ago. It shows that in South Korea, men have turned to conservatism at a rapid rate, while women are becoming more and more liberal. The trend is coherent with the growing popularity of anti-feminist and anti-LGBTQ+ rhetoric among men, which is meant to divert attention from economic difficulties. Those same economic difficulties and the pressure that comes with working in a neoliberal economy means that more and more South Korean women must think twice before having children. The declining birth rate is the result of those constraints, as well as the development of a feminist consciousness, as embodied by the 4B movement. So the 4B movement, Julia Fox, but also the anti-male gaze trend on TikTok, all the discussions on voluntary celibacy, are all connected to the belief that women's liberation requires disengagement from patriarchy. But that was surely not invented by Julia Fox. Disengagement from patriarchy, including heterosexuality, was a key aspect of lesbian separatism. So the movement started within larger feminist and LGBTQ+ movements and was especially popular in the 1970s and 1980s. It believed that women, especially lesbians, should separate from men and male-dominated systems to create their own communities and ways of living. This includes setting up women-only spaces, businesses, events, and art. As an example, in 1969, French author and feminist theorist Monique Wittig wrote Les Guerrières, The Warriors, translated in 1971 in English. The novel envisions a society where women band together to fight against male dominance. It explores the idea of a world without men, where women create their own rules and structures. The women in the novel often speak as a collective, we, to emphasize solidarity and communal identity over individualism. We're getting deep into feminist theory in this video, I love it! No, but seriously, before I continue, I think it's so important to understand the roots of what the movement is today, and that's what I'm doing right now, so keep listening, stay focused, please. So we mentioned Monique Wittig, but around the same year, The Dialectic of Sex, written by radical feminist Shulamith Firestone, was published. It's a classic in feminist theory, and it argues that there is a sexual class system, and that a reordering of society is necessary to fully eradicate sexism. Finally, last example, we can mention Françoise de Bonne, another French lady, who's getting some attention lately with the translation and publication of her 1974 essay titled Feminism and Death. The idea behind the book is that, quote, the patriarchal system's claim over women's bodies and the natural world destroys both, and that feminism and environmentalism must bring about a new mutation, an overthrow of not just male power, but the system of power itself. OG radical feminism, we're so far away from the goalposts. It's kind of the equivalent of we can't reform capitalism, we have to dismantle it completely. Even though those radical feminists remained a minority, their essays and art had an influence on the rest of the feminist movement. Basically, they kept mainstream heterosexual feminists in check. They embodied the radical flank, forcing feminist discussions in the media. As Firestone put it, radical feminism sees gender oppression as a sexual class system that must be overthrown. It looks at how men and women are socialized to adopt different gender roles and refuses that male violence be naturalized through a biased vision of biology. The recent trend of evolutionary psychology is a great example of that. It's the new scientific tool used by conservatives to legitimize gender inequality, or to put it differently, it's the art of naturalizing sexist biases with dodgy scientific methodologies applied on groups of participants so small you'd think you're in a Jubilee video. Anyway, while the majority of radical feminists understood separatism as a necessary step to overthrow the sexual class system, some people, some feminists, interpreted separatism as the eradication of anything masculine. Some radical feminists started looking at feminine values not as a product of an education to womanhood, but as a natural characteristic of women. On the other hand, masculine values, understood as the product of the Y chromosome and often characterized through their D, were to be eradicated. That distinction made between women and their wombs versus men and their D, some radical feminists came to defend, is what gave birth to the TERF movement. TERFs do not want to recognize the existence of trans women. Why? Because they have too much masculine energy. To put it very bluntly, they see trans women and their potential D. There's an obsession around the D, it's fascinating. But anyway, they see trans women and their potential D as a patriarchal, soft and hard power in action. This is getting so sexual. But it's not my fault, it's their fault. They are obsessed with the D. The soft power refers to the so-called influence of trans women on feminist movements, and the hard power refers to them being a physical threat in women-only spaces. This branch of so-called radical feminism has clearly distanced itself from the initial sexual class narrative that looks at patriarchy as a system, not as a collection of threatening Ds. And you know what? That's also the reason why I'm quite skeptical of a discourse that put the onus on heterosexual women and promote that disengagement from patriarchy on an individual level. Let me explain why. In an article on heterosexuality and its discontent, researcher Yue-Fei Wang argues that, quote, placing the responsibility for heterosexuality onto women reflects a wider trend that deflects responsibility from structural problems onto individual choices, compares the personal responsibility of giving up heterosexuality to the personal responsibility of adopting sustainable habits like recycling. It is true that if enough people take responsibility and change their lifestyle to protest against a system they disagree with, we can see change. But doing just that cannot be enough. You see, when feminism or any social movement prioritize morality and personal responsibility over structural demands and legislation, then we know the movement is heading in the wrong direction. When we say that a true feminist has to give up heterosexuality, we reduce the activism to the individual. So those who refuse to make that lifestyle change are perceived as morally wrong, while those who do the lifestyle change are morally good. That's how some people view activism, a matter of good people doing the right thing and bad people refusing to change. But that is only one part of activism and not necessarily the best one. It's not necessarily the best one because it requires a large number of people to change their lifestyle in order to function, and for some group of people, that might be really challenging. You see, factors like class, poverty, cultural differences come into play here, so it's much more efficient to focus on forms of activism that change the conditions of existence, so that the lifestyle change isn't a choice, but just a reality, an incentive even. And just to be very clear on this, because as soon as I criticize some subsections of feminism, Some people weaponize it to discredit the whole movement. No, I encourage men and women to challenge the way they were brought up in the world. I encourage men to reject toxic masculinity as much as I encourage women to reject gender norms and stop living for men's validation. But I also encourage all of us to look at our conditions of existence, who we are, where we grew up, our level of education, where we live, and understand that when we demand a certain lifestyle change, we have to be aware that we don't start on the same line. Let's take the example of Julia Fox. Julia Fox, a white, attractive, wealthy woman, a mother, rejected the male gaze and chose celibacy. That change looked drastic, but when we take into account her conditions of existence, her socio-economic status, the lifestyle change was pretty safe. On the other hand, let's take a look at a woman called Youngmi. Youngmi is a 25-year-old nurse born to a poor family in Daegu, South Korea, known for being one of the most conservative cities in the country. Despite her meager budget as a nursing student, she purchased new clothes each season, spending a lot of money on cheap, poor-quality clothes from H&M. She wore makeup religiously. Quote, "I had this pressure of wanting to look beautiful and wanting to be desirable physically and sexually." End of the quote. Now, Youngmi progressively got interested in South Korean feminist movements through social media, and she eventually shaved her head, stopped wearing makeup, and joined the so-called Escape the Corset movement. That is a drastic change of lifestyle. Youngmi went from there to there. And my goal is not to compare the two, Julia Fox and Youngmi, and say this person is better than this person. As I said earlier, I don't think moralizing tendencies in social movements are productive, and this is just another example of that. So, if I had to summarize what we've looked at so far, I would say that 1970s radical feminism lost its radicality as soon as its structural analysis of oppression was traded for individualistic, psychological, or moralizing analysis. Radical feminism was short-lived because during the Cold War, ideologies related to Marxism were to be silenced or banned. Since then, we've seen the development of neoliberal forms of feminism, the girl boss, but also essentialist forms of feminism, like TERFs, divine femininity and the triad wife, or divestment feminism, as we've seen with Julia Fox and the 4B movement. So forms of feminism that are centered on the individual, on lifestyle, and not necessarily structures. All of that gave us a bit more context around the idea of celibacy as a form of protest, and also why Bumble received such a backlash. Now in the second part, I want to approach the backlash against Bumble in a different way. I might even defend them a little bit, just a little bit. So dating apps are mostly awful, let's be honest. People use them and hate them at the same time. Actually, when asked what are their intentions when downloading the app, people mostly reply that they want to find a partner. Yet we know that it's not in the app's interest. So we're playing with something that doesn't want us to succeed. But to be honest though, I was a bit surprised when I saw the statistics. And when I was talking about the Bumble ad campaign with my friend Celia, she said that she understood the backlash, but still found it funny that Bumble appealed to, the transactional, selfish aspect of dating apps. Okay, let's be honest here. In a lot of cases, what makes someone download the app is a selfish impulse of seeking validation or feeling desirable. A lot of us download the apps to get that ego boost before thinking about engaging with others and potentially develop a relationship. I feel like there's a refusal to accept that primal, selfish urge of wanting to feel desired. For me, the Bumble backlash is revealing of how uncomfortable we are with everything related to sexual liberation, and by extension, it's revealing of how much we misunderstand it. If you're brave enough to listen to anti-sexual liberation advocates, so I'm talking about Louis Perry, Michel Peterson, Candace Owens, as well as all their male counterparts, it feels like the sexual revolution was just wrong, nothing good about it. Women got screwed. It made us do things that were not in our nature, a sexless, docile nature. So shame hookup culture, ban the pill, ban abortion, preserve yourself, hold your seed, your body is a temple meant for procreation. Female rappers, for example, are often criticized for embodying everything that is wrong with the sexual liberation, and they feel that pressure. They feel like they need to realign with purity culture at some point. In an interview with Elle magazine, Nicki Minaj declared she was going to go in the opposite direction and hope her then new album, Queen, would show women that, quote, "it's okay to keep your legs closed." In a maybe ironic, maybe not so ironic way, Megan Thee Stallion said she preferred to keep her body count low on Hot 97's Ebro in the morning. So to put it simply, we live in a society, a capitalist and patriarchal society, in which sex is mostly approached in two ways. First, it's an avenue to be cool and empowered. On dating apps, in colleges, in big corporations, having an active sexual life can be socially rewarded. But two, it is still constrained to a deeply ingrained purity culture which seeks to reduce sex to procreation. Hold your seat, ladies. In fact, people who approach sex as in one, so as an avenue to be cool and empowered, don't necessarily view sex as a deep human-to-human connection, but rather as consumption. It's seen as an ego boost, and there's nothing wrong with that. As long as it's consensual, you can have fun as much as you want, kids. However, this approach entails that sex is used as a tool, as a medium to achieve something else, the ego boost or the increased social status. That's why it's weird to me to talk about hookup culture as the embodiment of sexual liberation. I envision sexual liberation as sex for sex, not sex for power, not sex for procreation, just experimenting with sex for the sake of it. This, unfortunately, can hardly be achieved when purity culture is hiding in the back, keeping an eye on you. It's like doing funky business in the bedroom when a parent is in the house. You can't fully enjoy the moment. The funky business turns into a transgression of the norm, but the norm is still there. Someone might knock on the door anytime. Hookup culture is a transgression of purity culture. Transgression implies that it's an abnormal state. Most of the time, transgression is temporary. After doing the funky business in college, people generally find a partner, choose to be exclusive, have kids, yada yada. So in my opinion, Bumble is appealing to our appetite for transgression in their ad campaign. They need young women to subscribe to their model of sexual liberation, one based on ego boosts and consumption. But we don't like to admit that transgressive side, because we're conscious of purity norms. As kids or teenagers, we learn about the characteristics of sex as procreation, which means that we subconsciously learn about what transgression is. When someone tells you the rule, you subconsciously understand what is against the rule, what is the transgression. The second thing is that we use sexual activity, or the absence of it, as a social currency. That means that we haven't necessarily taken the time to understand what a sexually liberated being is, because we struggle to imagine sexual liberation outside transgression, that was number one, and consumption, that was number two, meaning outside patriarchy and capitalism. So yeah, in my opinion, the Bumble backlash is 1. An attempt to affirm celibacy and the refusal to have sex with men as a political act, which is coherent with the evolution of feminism from its 1970s Marxist framework to recently with its more personal responsibility framework. And 2, a consequence of a limited vision of the sexual liberation as a consumerist transgression of a conservative norm which remains present in the background, rather than a complete reversal of purity culture and the norms that come with it. Whew. So yeah, that's it for today. Feel free to pause at the end. Maybe that was a bit too dense, but we gotta get technical, we gotta get deep at times, and I guess today was one of those videos. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, the conversation continues in the comments section. Don't forget to like, to subscribe if it's not already done. Also, you saw me quoting my book at the beginning of the video. Well, if you're interested in those topics, I highly recommend you pick up a copy of Collapse Feminism. It's my book. It's available everywhere. It's also available as an ebook, as an audiobook. I got you covered. I would like to thank my Patreons for their support, and a special thank to top tier patrons: Dominic, Yelan, B, Parenthesis, Nick, Tinfoil Pancakes, Marshall, Trogdor the Burninator, Brandon, James, Ujwal, Pablo, Patrick, Boris, Ria, Ivan, Toki, Koriji, Kodrina, Tristan, Lenny, Christopher A. Butler, Jan Donage, Alex, Manuel, Jay, Christopher France, and Perry. And thank you to the other ones who prefer to stay anonymous. Now let me talk to you about our sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform to grow your presence online. They give you a bunch of tools to create your ideal websites. So this is mine so far, Alice Capelle. I use it as a platform to kind of show all the work that I do on YouTube, my contributions, but also my book. I also added all my social media accounts. You also have analytical tools. You can run effective email campaigns. On their website, you can also get advice from professionals on how to build your website, etc. So many things you can do. So if you're interested in it, if you want to try it out, then go to squarespace.com to get a free trial. And once you're ready to go public, then you can go to squarespace.com/alice.cappelleyt to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring the video, and yeah, that's it. I'll see you very soon. Salut!